All right, and we are live, I think. Yes, okay, we are live. Good, good. Oh, shit. I always forget to do this at the start. There we go. Pop that on per usual. All right, good to go. Greetings and salutations, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to the Storyteller's Corner. I'm your host, Joshua T. Calkins Trubergy, also known as Byron the Sidious. Really quick, wearing the hat for Story Arc, Comics, and Collectibles. I'm going to go ahead and pop that off now. Um, it's a local comic book shop, which I've been a customer at now pretty much since like the second week of them being open and in operation. Lee's a pretty good guy. He was willing to let me select like half of the options he had available for free comic books day last Saturday when I popped in on my way to work to pick up my usual. I've been just as I did with Oblivion Song when I went in once per week on payday or on Saturdays on my way to work to pick up one volume. A few weeks ago, I started picking up the entries from Batman's Court of Owls and the New 52 continuity. I haven't started reading them yet, but I have been dutifully stopping um, in order to pick up the series of compilations and collections. I haven't read through this yet, but this was on the free comic books day, and I figured I'd check this out because it's Transformers, and I love Transformers, so why the hell not? I also grabbed the Energon Universe freebie that he had on the table, so I was like, sure, I'll grab that, not a problem. That's right up my alley. Um, so before I dive into the meat of this presentation, I want to take a moment to put out a hopefully brief thank you to Ryan Roger Athay of Reality Based and to PWG, Problematic White Guy, who is kind of a producer on the programs and streams for Toasty with the Mosty 69 on Rumble, predominantly on Rumble. She's on YouTube as well, but quite frankly, screw you to YouTube for their censoriousness and their willingness to um, basically nuke people from orbit just for going against certain popular or well-known figures and former OnlyFans cam girls. No Alyssa Mercante names shall be mentioned. Anyway, um, both Ryan Roger Athay and John, it did not escape me that in the early material on a couple of their recent streams over the last couple of days, when I've nipped in to say hello, as I often do, right near the start of their shows, because I'm a brokey and I can't afford a lot of super chats because I've got, a mortgage and bills to pay and kids to feed. So I don't allocate much of any budget really for super chats and that sort of thing. I've done it in the past when I had PayPal funds available. And I had those PayPal funds available because of royalties payments from sales of my books. Um, and it wasn't a lot of money, so I was like, I'll play with it. I can do some super chats, share the love, but I can't usually do that sort of thing. So I try to jump in early on shows so I can just say, hi, how you doing? Just letting you know I'm here and that I'm listening. Oftentimes I listen to their shows when I'm at work, Wednesday through Sunday, and I can't really interact much as it is. Um, and then just because I don't have funding available for super chats, well, then Josh, you could just spam the hell out of the regular chat. No, that's rude. It's crass. It's untoward, and it robs the people who are actually there and capable of keeping up in real time in the chat live, chit-chatting with one another and or the hosts. I don't want to take away from their enjoyment of the program. It's not my place to do that. It would just be unpleasant. It's not good etiquette. Now, true, in many cases, I'm the last person to try to talk about etiquette. I can be a rude son of a bitch. I get that. But both of them, after I said hi, indicated that they were glad to see I was there in their show. And they both said, hope you're effectively, I'm paraphrasing here, hope you're doing okay since the whole knockdown, drag out flame war between you and JDA or John Delarose. And the way that Ryan put it was, hope you're doing all right after your baptism in fire dealing with this fellow. I assure you both, I'm fine. I thank you for the concern. I appreciate that, particularly given that I'm only really tangentially attached as a audience member to your community, to your circle of viewers and friends and acquaintances. You don't owe me any kind of concern, but I appreciate that you extended it anyhow. Um, you know, Ryan might not be old enough because he's only 25. He doesn't look it, but John might be old enough to appreciate when I quote or paraphrase David Foster Wallace, saying that true sentimentality is often dismissed by the postmodernist types and the ironic types as gooey nonsense, and it's very, demonstrates weakness or old world thinking. But I can often, and I'm often a prick, yes, but I am also capable of being sentimental and being willing to expose a touch of vulnerability and humanity in saying, I appreciate the concern. And perhaps it was initially deserved because I was losing my temper towards Delarose. And whether or not that temper and anger was deserved or not, I should not have lost control of myself in the way I did. I let this little troll get under my skin. Shit stirring is what he does, and he effectively did it. And I fell right into that trap and saw myself behaving in a way that is very uncharacteristic for me unless I feel like I'm in a corner. I get volatile when I feel like I'm put into a corner. I'm more than capable of being a very unpleasant fellow in those circumstances. I don't care for people to see that aspect of my personality, but I know it's there. I accept it. I've gone through the Jungian shadow work to understand that I'm more than capable of being that asshole. It's a part of who I am as a total. I'm capable of it. I don't enjoy doing it because it often stops conversation and it dehumanizes the people who are involved in the conversation. I'm going to use that as a segue. What dehumanizes people more than anything are justifications of violence. And there's a bit of old doggerel or conventional wisdom that says nothing good ever comes from violence. I'd like to disagree with that in the following way. I think that this phrase, while I have adhered to it for a very long time, I think it requires a little bit of editing and examination. I would say that it needs to be rephrased. The note that I took earlier this morning, I would posit that the edit should read, nothing good ever comes from unconstrained violence. And I'm going to utilize an anecdote from my own youth to argue the conventional wisdom. And I understand that anecdote is not data. An anecdote is not evidence. I would counterpoint that with the following. Data is the compilation of all of the available anecdotes jammed together and analyzed for common through lines to yield your analytical result. Is it not? There's a little bit of wishy-washiness there, and I will admit that that's not the strongest argument, but allow me, if I may, to proceed. When I was a teenager, when I was in ninth grade, I I had a little bit of a bully. Most of us in my grade had a bit of a bully in a kid in our class who had been held back a couple of years, and as a result was a couple of years and several inches taller than all of the rest of us. And he was an unpleasant fellow by the name of Aaron Parks. And he was volatile, and he was more than willing to engage in physical unpleasantness. And bear in mind, this was back in the mid 90s. So this wasn't the same sort of scale of volatile or violent interaction that you'll find a lot of kids are engaging in nowadays. But he would push people around. He would punch people at random in the arm or kick them in the ass into their lockers. He would close people's lockers on their hands or their arms or shoulders. He was a jerk. He was a jackass. And he kind of lasered in on me at one point because I was a weirdo and a nerd. It was well known I was just a weird kid, a weird guy. I was into Dungeons and Dragons and video games and cartoons. Anime and manga were starting to be popular around the mid to late 90s, and I was really involved and a big fan of those forms of media. I was into comic books, so I had a reputation as a nerd, as a dork. I was also constantly reading for leisure purposes. So there was already kind of a targeting ridicule on my back, as it were. But I didn't care because most of my friends were also kind of dorky, kind of nerds. That was our niche. That was our thing. That was our realm of enjoyment and entertainment. And in the sort of prototypical way that knuckle draggers and troglodytes tend to historically engage, Aaron saw me as prime target. And for about the first quarter of the school year, I just let it go when he would give me a nudge or a push or call me a faggot or shove me into the wall, passing between classes. When he would, we had the same math class together, unfortunately, and he would spend a decent amount of time flicking shit in my direction. I just let it go. I thought he's just being a jerk. Big fucking deal. And at one point, I don't remember the exact phrasing, but he had made some smarmy remark to which I made a response back, uh, questioning his parentage in a way that other kids in the class found amusing and did the whole, oh, nonsense that kids do. And he took umbrage with this, as a fellow would. If you question their mother's devotion to their father, as it were, in not quite so pleasant a way of phrasing it. And I remember looking over at him with a smug little smirk on my face and him looking dead serious and saying, "You're fucking dead." And I thought, okay, this is great. I've stepped over the line here, and I've pushed this guy from just wanting to pick on me to now he wants to take my head clean off my shoulders. I have stepped in it. This will not be great. Now, unbeknownst to Aaron, and unbeknownst to most of my classmates, my brother Colin and I had already, for about 4 years, been studying martial arts at a dojo just down the street from our parents' house. And at the time, I had achieved the rank of green belt in Ed Parker's Chinese American Kenpo Karate. And we had also done some training in Wing Chun and started training in some Muay Thai. I had a fairly decent background and understanding of the mechanics of interpersonal melee combat. But I didn't exactly talk about this or brag about it because, for the most part, I saw it as unnecessary to make that an element or facet of my personality to other people around me. It wasn't something that I had a bunch of friends who were also doing that. It was more of a family thing from my brother and myself and our dad and a couple of friends, but it wasn't something that we really brought up or talked about a lot in school. We didn't bring it up at all because it wasn't interesting to other people who weren't involved in it. We figured, especially my buddy Chris and I, we figured nobody else is going to understand what we're talking about. So, you and I, there's nobody else around. We'll chit chat about it. We'll, compare notes. But otherwise, why bother bringing it up? It's not important. But as a result, not many people in the school, in our class, understood that I knew what I was doing if I got into a fight. And on the way from math class to my next period, Mr. Aaron Parks decided this was a prime opportunity, because he was still pissed off about the comment I had made about his mother, to make his displeasure known in the form of a physical beating. And I was heading towards the stairs in the school to go up to the next level. I hear behind me, "Hey, kid!" And I turned around, and there was Aaron, looming over me by a good 5 or 6 inches in height. But he was also kind of scrawny. And he grabbed my shirt, and he started to try to push me toward the stairs, to throw me down the stairs. And when he grabbed my shirt, I pinned his hand against my chest, brought my other arm around to dislodge him to the side, to off balance him, and I proceeded to strike him several times in the side of the head. And when he started stumbling and reaching up to hold his head, I hook kicked him in the ribs, and then thrust kicked him across the platform of between stair levels into the wall. And it happened like that. It happened quickly. And as he kind of fell on the floor, holding his head and looking at me like, what the fuck just happened? He started to try to get back up, and I approached him and I wheel kicked him across the head. And he went down. And I stood there kind of shaking, and I vomited. I turned my head and I threw up. And there were a bunch of kids around, all screaming and hooting and hollering. And finally, a couple of teachers and the vice principal made their way through the crowd. And Vice Principal Arnold grabbed me by the wrist and said, "Come with me." And he kind of half dragged me downstairs and all the way to his office. And he said, "Sit down." And I sat down in the chair. And he pulled a bottle of water from behind his desk and he offered it to me. He said, "Here, take a drink. Steady yourself." So I took a drink, and I felt like hell. I felt like a monster. Because the last thing I saw when I looked back as Principal Arnold was dragging me away, as I looked back and I saw blood just running down Aaron's nose as he was trying to roll onto his side and hold his midsection with his other hand from the rib kick. And Vice Principal Arnold, he asked me, "Where did you learn to do that?" And I kind of quirked my head to the side. I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Where did you learn to fight?" I said, "Well, my brother Colin and I, we've been taking karate lessons for a few years now." He said, okay, you've never, I don't even know your name. I told him, I'm Josh, Joshua Calkins. He said, okay, well, Josh, you know you're in trouble. Now, mind you, this is 1996. Um, the absolute zero tolerance policy for fighting or violence in most schools in Western New York State was not yet a thing everywhere. It was starting to be implemented in a lot of places, especially out on the eastern half of the state in New York City and Albany, Rochester. But in Buffalo schools, it hadn't yet become a thing universally. So it wasn't like I was going to be automatically expelled. And I just kind of nodded. I said, okay, do you need to call my parents? He goes, yes. Sit here. Give me a minute. And he went away. I assumed to talk to the principal, Principal Smith. Vice Principal Arnold came back in, sat down. He said, okay, sorry about leaving you here for that long, because it had been like a good almost half an hour. He said, I called your parents after I talked to Principal Smith to go over, discuss what's going to happen. Your dad's on his way. And I thought, okay, I'm a dead man. You're sitting here across from a kid who is going to be dead in about 15 to 20 minutes. And about 5 minutes later, my father comes into the office, and I can feel this rage radiating off of my father. And he looks down at me, and the first words out of his mouth are, what the fuck did you do? And Vice Principal Arnold says, well, Mr. Calkins, I saw the entire exchange. I didn't know that at the time. He said, I saw the entire exchange. The other student tried to shove your son down the stairs, which would have resulted in some pretty serious injury, potentially. And your son defended himself. He did engage in a fight, so we're going to have to give him 1 day of in-school suspension tomorrow. So he's going to come to school, he's going to go to the library, and he's going to stay there all day for in-school suspension. And if you've ever felt somebody's anger vacuum out of a space, you will understand what I felt in that moment from my father. The rage that he had felt when he first stepped into the office vanished. And it vanished, I think, when Vice Principal Arnold said, your son didn't start this fight. He defended himself. And my father said, okay, grab your stuff, boy. Let's go. I grabbed my bag, got up, and followed my father out to the car. He didn't say a word. We got in his car. He looked over at me and said, how are you feeling? I said, I'm kind of sick. I threw up after it was over. And my dad just kind of smiled. He goes, yeah, that's adrenaline, son. You'll be fine. Let's get you home. And we drove home in absolute silence for the 4 or 5 minutes it took, because we lived fairly close to the school. And we get home, and I get out of the car, and I look at my dad, and I say, am I grounded? And my father said, no, you're not grounded. You didn't start this fight, but you finished it. That's good. You can go inside and read your book or play your video games, whatever you're going to do. Just stay out of my hair. I got to get ready for work. That was it. Now, the immediate effect was that I understood at this juncture that I had engaged in a violent response to someone attempting to be violent toward me. But that was not the only takeaway, because all that told me was I know well enough what I'm doing to defend myself from an unarmed person. Yeah, Parks had a little bit of a size advantage on me and age, and he had been more experienced in getting into physical altercations than I had at that point, other than sparring with my brother Colin. But all of that sparring with my brother Colin and sparring with our dad and sparring with other students at the dojo had prepared me, at least minimally or modestly, for getting into an actual physical altercation. I was able to demonstrate that in real time. A few days later, when I was, because my in school suspension was on a Friday, obviously no school on the weekend on Saturday or Sunday. On Monday, when I got back to school, Aaron Parks, swollen, his face was still somewhat swollen. I realized that I had hit him so hard right on the side of his eye. Starts to approach me before first class, and I felt like, okay, I'm going to have to do this again. And he stopped a few feet away and put his hands up and said, hey, I'm sorry. We cool? And I just said, yeah, I guess. Just fucking leave me alone. And fair enough. He left me the fuck alone for a couple of weeks. But then when he did try to approach me again a couple of weeks later, it was with a question about something that we had gone over in math class. He wasn't being hostile. He wasn't being a prick. And it took me several more days to actually pay any attention to the kid. But he was getting into fewer altercations, and he wasn't being as nasty to other kids in my friend group, the other nerds, the other geeks. He wasn't picking on them as much. He was making occasional side mouth comments, but he wasn't touching them. He wasn't trying to flick anybody or push anyone or shove or hip bump check anybody into a locker. That stopped. This aggressive kid toned it down because he had finally come up against someone who was willing to match his nastiness with a higher level of nastiness. But it was restrained. I wasn't trying to kill the kid. I was trying to get him to go the fuck away and to never want to try it again. That was my only aim, was to defend myself and put Paige to the message or idea that he could fuck with me again down the road. The simple message was, stop it, you keep doing this again, or you keep doing this, and the result is not going to be great for you. And to his credit, Aaron Parks learned the lesson. But I was not unrestrained in my response to him. It was a disproportionate response, yes, because he grabbed me. He was going to try to shove me. But he didn't get to that point. He was instead met with a disproportional, immediate response of violence, with me pushing him away, punching him several times in the face and head, kicking him in the ribs, and then kicking him again in the side. That was not great, and I didn't feel great afterwards. I already said I threw up. But something good did come out of that moment of violence. I understand that that's anecdotal, and that is not typically what happens. Normally, in the run of history, of human history, violence just breeds more violence. Yes, I am absolutely going to bow my head to that bit of the conventional wisdom. But that is without restraint. The nastiness that I unfolded on Aaron Parks was not only a defensive response, but it wasn't over the top to the point where he was crippled or maimed or killed. He was able to recover relatively quickly because, thankfully for him, he was a pretty healthy guy. He was a pretty healthy kid. He was in decent shape. A little gangly, but that's because he was a tall kid. And it altered his behavior toward other people in the aftermath. He became less volatile to other people. He didn't immediately respond with violence of his own or nastiness or uh, lack of empathy just because he wasn't like these other kids who he routinely picked on. It changed his framework and how he responded to and interacted with other people who were unlike him. Was that to his benefit? I'd like to think yes. I can't say with absolute certainty because I'm no authority on these things, and I don't know what really happened to Aaron Parks after high school. I know he did graduate with my class. He stopped failing and getting held back. But I don't think that was down to anything I did. I don't think that was as a result of the fight. I think that was more he had already repeated the grade twice and didn't want to do that shit again. I think he got his own shit together that way. He wasn't a dumb kid. He just never really applied himself. Um, but thinking back on that incident has made me question the conventional wisdom of the phrase, nothing good ever comes from violence. I disagree, in part because of my own experience with it. Because my having been restrained in violence against him, I not only defended myself, but I at least in part helped change his pattern of behavior to make him less aggressive and less nasty to other people around him. So I do believe a benefit was rendered. Back in a moment. Gotta hit the bathroom. And just for clarification purposes, this is not going to be a very long stream. This is not going to be a very long program today. Um, so, yeah. This is why I personally don't adhere purely to the notion that nothing good ever comes from violence. I think it needs to be edited, and as I said before, I think it should be altered to reflect the reality of the situation, which is that nothing good ever comes from unrestrained violence. When I was younger, I hate that phrase because it makes me sound like a boomer. and older than I am, um, although some days I feel ancient, I won't lie. Um, when I was younger, when I was in middle school and high school, when boys got into fights with one another, it was fisticuffs. They would punch and slap and kick and shove and grapple, wrestle around on the ground. There was no introduction of a knife or a gun. It was just beating the shit out of each other until one kid couldn't get up. When they were knocked unconscious, the expectations were never of to the death. Nowadays, it seems like it's borderline gladiatorial combat arenas that these kids are in, and it's no good. But anyhow, we're now going to move on to a very light bit, a brief bit of shop talk. Um, it's really to do with something that I've decided I want to do for a couple of the discords that I'm in, that I'm a member of. Um, I'm going to start taking some of my older published material, some of my early Temelarian tales, a couple of my early Roads Through Amelia or Amelia City stories, um, and possibly Motor City Shambler, the first tale of Bob the Zombie. And I'm going to get those converted into PDF format files so that I can more easily and readily share them in a couple of my Discord servers for folks to download for free reading. These are older works of mine that have been commercially published and have been around and available for quite some time, for quite a few years. The first book I published was back in 2007, Freedom of the Fire, in 2 volumes, The Damnation of the Realm and The Dread Knight's Redemption. But originally it was one manuscript. It was one book, one text file. And Motor City Shambler was published the same year. And I'm going to convert those into PDF format files, like I said, to share into those Discord servers as free reading material for the other members in those servers. I understand full well that means I'm giving away free stuff. I've been giving away free material for years in the form of my Substack right here. It is not that I don't value my efforts. I do value my efforts, and I still have plenty of books for sale. And I'm going to pull the reference to a lot of people have been making when talking about JDA, John De La Rose, the whole John Lovitz / Jay Sherman, buy my book, buy my book, buy my book. Let me tell you something, guys. I've been making that joke since the days of blog TV, when I would literally do that as a joke / self-promotion material bit on my program. But this, for instance, The Justice of Amelia, is available for sale on Lulu.com and on Amazon.com. I have shared some of the stories in this as free read aloud streams right here on Rumble and YouTube. I am robbing myself of sales potentially, yes. But here's the thing. We have, especially in the West, we have a deluge of materials to choose from for our entertainment options in video games, television shows, movies. But a lot of it is slop. And the stuff that isn't slop, the people who make it, they have to try and make a living. Or they're trying to make an honest living off of that material. I'd love to be a published author with enough sales to make writing fiction my living. But I also accept and acknowledge that that's probably not going to happen. I have enough self awareness to be aware that that only happens for about zero point 0.5 to 1% of all authors in genre fiction, especially in fantasy and horror, which are the genres that I focus on, that I specialize in as a storyteller. As a reader, fantasy, horror, and sci fi. I've done a couple of sci fi stories, but not a lot. My point being, maybe I will be shooting myself in the foot by not saying, well, you got to buy this stuff because I'm trying to make headway of it. I'm trying to earn a living. I have a regular job. You know, I have a regular job. So does my ever loving wife, who oftentimes I feel she shouldn't work as hard as she does. But we have 4 kids at home, so we both need to work to bring in an income and afford this house and all of our other bills. So maybe I'm shooting myself in the foot by closing off or reducing the availability of an income stream in the form of book sales. But I put this point out there before. I have said this before. So I'm kind of repeating myself, and I hate repeating myself, but I'm going to because the point deserves to be made. God called on me to be a father first, a husband close second, and thirdly, a storyteller, to promote and live in the art of the written word. He never said anything about making a living off of it. He just said, tell stories. I know that might sound schizophrenic. Oh, you're hearing God's voice. You belong in a loony bin. I hear plenty of other voices too. That's part of actually being a schizophrenic, folks. That's a whole other story, and I've told that story before, actually. So that's besides the point. What I'm trying to get at is, yes, I may be reducing my options in terms of hoping for any kind of sales, but I think you'll find that if people enjoy what you do as an artist, they'll find a way to support you. That support is not always going to be financial in form. I'm okay with that. Anyhow, that's going to do it for me for now, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to thank you if you are watching this later on in the replay, because I imagine that any views, that's where they're going to come from. Since I didn't have a lot of live viewership today, that's all right. Everyone has their options. I respect that choice. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. I ask that you take care of yourselves, and as always, keep reading.